Well, good evening, and welcome to Kopernik Observatory. My name is Drew Desker. I'm the director here at Kopernik. It's great to see some familiar faces and some new faces. By show of hands, who's here for the first time or hasn't been here since their 4th grade field trip? All right, very good. And who here is members? Okay, basically the other half. Great. Well, anyway, Kopernik, we are a nonprofit, and we belong to what's called the ASTC, Association of Science and Technology Centers. And it's a consortium of over, actually, we just saw the numbers, 385 other science centers that honor each other's memberships. So if you like this kind of place, a Kopernik membership is actually a great value, and you can take it 384 other places, I guess. And but anyway, we're an informal science facility, a public observatory. Our website is sort of keeps up to date with what's going on. So obviously tonight's program is the How Our Minds Learn the Sounds of Speech. But things that are coming up, we have Rocket Fest. This is our 15th Rocket Fest, where families will build those Estes rockets, and then we launch them up here. That'll be our launch day will be actually on June 1st. Last year we launched 116 rockets, and we're trying to shoot for more. So if that's something that interests you, you can sign up through our website, as well as our summer camps now are we're about 60% full already, and which is great. But there's still openings in essentially all of the camps. Some of the camps are running twice, so like there might be one session that's already full, but then there's still openings in the other camps. So if you have a child or a grandchild that's somewhere between second grade and high school, check out what we've got to offer. And well, we'll talk about our 50th anniversary in a few weeks here. We've got some big things coming up. But also, when you come up here, you go to programs, and you can see what's coming up next. So tonight is the talk on speech and sound. Next week, we're going to return to our wheelhouse of astronomy. And Robert Olaf Seegers is one of our educators talking about ringed planets. And it's more than just Saturn. Then we have Professor Oldfield come up and talk about dinosaurs, always a very popular talk. We'll have a talk on summer skies. And then an interesting topic, the sort of science and religion, and is there a conflict or is it complementary or conciliance? So another good topic, and we're starting to work on putting together our summer programs. So one of the things that we do here, we've now been doing it now since 2020, is we've been live streaming our programs, and it actually started out as when COVID basically had to shut us down, we started live streaming our programs, and even though now we're able to put people back in the same room again, people still find it very, very popular. We have over 13,000 subscribers to our YouTube channel. And so little people from around the world, usually there's this person from Adelaide, Australia, who will be watching it now. Actually, it's Saturday afternoon for them. But anyway, so if you're unable to be here in person, and you can watch it on our YouTube live stream, or if you can't, if just Friday night was not going to work out for you, you can watch the recording. So we have a very great relationship with Binghamton University. We've had a number of their faculty and grad students come up and talk about the work that they do. And so tonight is one of those nights. And so Dr. Lim is out of the psychology department, and she and her colleagues actually helped us run Brain Day, which is sort of an open house that we had here for our summer camp. And kids got to learn more about brains. They actually got to see brains, and which is pretty neat. So, but what we're going to do here is that we're going to transition right over to Dr. Lim's presentation, and as soon as I can get this going here, and it's all you.
you hear me okay? Oh, yes. Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, thank you everyone for coming out here, and thanks Drew for inviting me to give this, a talk and an opportunity today. So today I'd like to talk about, just kind of interesting point of like, how do you actually start recognizing the speech sounds? You use it every day to communicate with each other. It's very easy, I guess, supposedly. And can anyone not understand what I'm talking about right now? Everybody can understand. Do you have to work really hard to understand me? Maybe not, right? But what I want to tell you today is that it's actually a very complex problem that your brain is actually solving to understand what is being said. So I'd like to talk about what are some of the issues, and how do like newborn infants, as they're like thrown out in the world, now hearing all these speech sounds, how do they actually even start learning? And then as an adult, when you try to now learn a new language, how do you do that, and how is it actually same or different? Okay. So today, let's actually first start out hearing some speech sounds. I think this is an English
I would say I'm a
sound.
cat person, even
Hear
though
it?
most cat people are so strange. People that admit to being cat people are always so bizarre. Like whenever I go to work out, my pants are always covered in cat hair. It's so embarrassing. Like I'm that person. I'm that lady that goes out with cat hair all over her pants.
All right. I don't know if anyone can relate that, but so here again, right? You can actually understand what she's trying to say, right? Not a problem. But I'm gonna let you hear a speech sounds that's coming from different country. Anyone here speak Korean? Nope. Okay. Perfect then. But just note though that the sound quality here is has a lot of reverb, so it's a little bit hard to hear. But try to attend and see if there's any word that you can actually pick out.
온화하고 다정한 날씨, 근면함과 올바른 예절이 포함되어 있었다. 아침마다 찬송가를 부르는 곳도 여기였고, 크리스마스를 축하하는 것도 이 세계에서 일어나는 일이었다. 이곳에는 밝은 미래로 향하는 올바른 길이 있었다.
Picked out any words? Anything that sound familiar? All right, that was Korean, and that's my. You were able to? Which one? What did you hear?
Like the third one.
Third one? That's great. So there was a word in that snippet saying Christmas. You heard? Anyone heard that? Yeah? Wow, great. Yeah, so somehow you can actually pick out some words that you know, even though it's something, embedded in a non-native speech sound, you can actually hear them fine. Okay? But how do we actually do that? And what is the
I would say
actual
I'm a cat
problem?
person,
Oops, sorry about
even
that.
though most cat people are
Oh my
so
God, don't
strange.
do that.
People
Sorry about that. All right. So what's actually happening here is this is kind of a snippet of the speech sounds that you are hearing. Okay. It's very continuous. It's a contiguous, sound signal that's actually reaching your ear. But from this kind of signal, how do you know where the words start and where the word end from this kind of input? Okay. So because you guys are all mostly native English speakers, you can actually kind of parse this kind of contiguous signal, but then in this sound, there's really no like pauses or silence or breaks that indicates this is where the word ends and where the word starts. It's all like kind of coming like back to back, okay? But your brain can actually figure that out to know, oh, this is one word I heard and the next word is coming, next word is coming. You can actually basically kind of parse this information. But if you actually look at this signal and then kind of map onto what is being said, it's actually like this whole chunk is like there are no silences between, right? So, great, right? But then if you can actually put this into basically like kind of like a printed text, it's almost kind of like this. All the like letters are kind of like right next to each other. And then how do you actually parse this? Okay, it can be actually parsed like this. The red on a tea kettle often chips. Okay, or in other words, like there, Don ate a kettle of 10 chips. All right, so this is kind of the problem that you're doing all the time. Like when you hear all these speech sound, it doesn't actually kind of come up with actually silences or anything, but your brain can actually parse this information. Can everybody hear me okay? Sorry, the mic is kind of on and off, so yeah, okay, great. So how do we actually begin this, like solving this kind of problem? We are actually starting learning with the sound system. Like the sounds like that organized that is in your native language is basically a building block of that. So it's actually really important because some of the speech sounds.
If I can,
Oh.
grab this. and
Yes. Oh, put it here.
Put it
Okay.
right, just like
Yes.
that. I think that should solve the problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So the speech sounds is really serving as a building blocks for you to parse and knowing what the word is being said. Okay, it's basically a smallest unit that make meaningful distinction in your language. So for instance, like some minimal pair words like that I wrote here, bear versus pear, they are different things, right? And like right and light, they mean different things and they sound different to you. Because these are actually a really important sound distinction you're making in English speech. But some languages do not have this kind of sound system, right? So just to give you some example here is this is basically like what kind of speech sounds exist in English repertoire. We do have some set of like a consonant sounds that you guys have, like b, p, or the, right? V, f. Right, those are all the meaningful, distinguishable sound that's used in English. So these are the consonant, these are the vowel sounds. So in English, we basically use about 44 different sounds, and then mix up with that, and then we kind of use the information. But different languages also have like different numbers of speech sound that is actually being used. So in Japanese, probably about like 23 or 22 sounds are being used. Korean, about like 28 sounds are being used. So, and then if you think about it, any guesses how many speech sounds are out there if we actually collapse across all languages in the globe? Guess? Millions. Oh, millions. Oh, okay. That's pretty high. Any other guesses? Well, 120? 120, okay, great. So we're kind of in the middle somewhere, about a little over 800 word sounds that exist. But of course, there are no language that use all 800 sounds. That's going to be too chaotic in a way, right? So we use basically some subset of sounds in each system, and then we basically have different sound system that is used in different languages. But things are like the speech sounds where you can hear the distinction pretty well, and you think, oh yeah, what is the difference? I mean, like beer and peer, of course, obviously they sound different. I hear differently and meaning differently, but in fact, some issue with the speech sound is that in fact it's highly, highly variable. Okay, so there are some like kind of like a core issue of speech perception, like the challenge that listeners have is that you basically are parsing very variable speech sound, but coming up with the actual interpretation. So it can be very variable depending on what sound is being said before and afterwards, or depending on who you talk to, or the speech like the speakers, like kind of how fast they speak, or the dialect, gender, or if like all kinds of differences could lend to difference in the acoustics of the sound. So here I actually brought some of the 4 sounds based on these sounds. So here is basically more like a graphical illustration of the acoustics, the actual physical sound that reach your ear. Can anyone guess what this sound would be, or do you think everybody's saying, or every speech signal here is saying the same word or not? Any guesses here? Yes?
I don't think they're saying the same.
They're not saying the same word? Okay. Yeah, everybody sort of agree in a way, maybe, or maybe not. But let's actually hear. Maybe it should play. Let's try. Huh? Anyway, I'll play.
I.
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 Do you think that's the same word? Yeah. So I, right? One I. Everybody was saying the same thing, same word, but it was different speaker. There are 2 female speakers here and 2 male speakers, but you can actually see you don't have much trouble understanding what was being said. But if you think about what your ear is hearing, this is very, very different. And how do you actually do that? And here is just another graphical illustration that if you're congested or if you're talking to a tall person or a small person, female, male, someone with an accent or someone who has a different dialect, right? The acoustics of speech get all changed up, okay? So like for me, like I guess like for you, I'm the stranger, right? You never heard me talking, but you can actually understand me fine. How do you actually do that, right? So just kind of going back to like really the complexity of the problem here that you are facing every day is that it kind of is well illustrated in this graph, where this is basically, I don't know, you can actually read this, but you can see some difference in the colors and these dots. Each of the dot is actually representing the person's acoustic kind of speech of their one vowel production. So each of these color indicates English vowel sound categories. And this actually, the data was collected by about 76 people saying these words or saying the vowels, okay? But you can actually see that this mapping, I mean, it's really the grouping of these vowel sounds are fairly messy. I don't know whether you would agree, but it's really not that organized, okay? But if we actually hear some vowel sounds, like top here is E vowel, whereas this one is like an A vowel. You know, they're kind of far apart from each other, so no problem, right? But then you hear, like right here, some kind of vowel sounds like A versus A. Those are different vowel categories, but also really highly overlapping. How do you know when you hear some sound right here that it should be A versus A? Yeah. But you can actually do that. That's what I'm saying. I didn't hear a difference. Oh. Like A versus A. Maybe I'm not producing it correctly, but these are the vowel categories. So maybe, but still, that's the point, is that it's actually, you know, acoustically very, very similar, but it is a different vowel sounds. And for you as a listener, you have to interpret this differently, right? And then if we go into like this part right here, I don't know whether you can see the colors, but at that point, there are like about 4 vowel categories are all collapsed in there. So if you hear that exactly the same sound, you can sometimes interpret this as a or a, right? It can actually be categorized in a different category, but you can actually solve that, right? And another thing is like, so the one thing I actually wanted to point out here is that, okay, you actually do have very robust sound categories of the speech sounds that that you're expert in, which is your native language, native speech. But you also kind of have to maintain a bit of flexibility, right? Given exactly the same sound, sometimes you have to interpret into a different vowel categories depending on the situation, depending on the context. So you kind of have to kind of maintain that flexibility. If you're not flexible, then you could actually interpret the sounds, wrongly in a way, right? So it's kind of a weird trade-off that you need to have some kind of stable knowledge about what the vowel sounds are like or consonant sounds are like, but also have to kind of be maintaining and be flexible. And then that flexibility comes very interestingly too, because there are other factors that could actually affect how you perceive speech. So here, I'm going to play some sounds, and it's actually a video. But for now, I want all of you to close your eyes. Do not look at the screen. Just close your eyes, okay? All right, let's play. Oh.
Ba.
Okay, I'm going to play one more time. Close your eyes.
Ba.
Okay, just one more time. Close your eyes.
Ba.
Okay, now open your eyes. Now please look at the screen. Okay, let me play again. Everybody looking at the screen? All right.
Ba.
Okay, I'm going to play one more time. Let's try again.
Ba.
Okay, one more.
Ba.
Okay. First time, when you were closing your eyes, what did you hear? Ba, ba, B sound, ba. Okay? Everybody heard that? Okay. So when you're looking at this lady now, what do you hear? Tha, right? Do you all hear tha or ba? Anyone hear ba? Oh, you do still? Yeah? Should we just try one more time?
Ba.
Oh, you should look at the screen. Look at the screen. Like, look at her. Yes.
Ba.
Still ba? You hear tha now? So the interesting thing is this is something called McGurk effect. I don't know if anyone has heard McGurk effect. Is that when you're, communicating, sometimes we hear the sounds, but also we look at someone's faces sometimes, right? Of course, you're on the phone, you can't do that. But when you're actually communicating, you're also looking at the people's faces, and then you can actually look at their mouth movement, right? So what's actually happening here is that you hear the actual sound you heard when you close your eyes truly was ba. So you hear ba, but your eyes and this, the mouth movement is saying tha, right? So it's basically something clashing here, right? And who wins? Because humans are such a visual animals. We're very visually, driven and like dominant people. So visual information kind of takes over what you're hearing. So I can, tell you, like I did not change the video. I was on this screen the whole time during this time, and then it was still giving you very quick switch in the perception, okay? And then the interesting thing is if you do this and then kind of watch her play it and then going away, going back and forth, you would still hear different sounds. So the thing is you were hearing exactly the same sound, but this perception, as I said, right, very flexible. Whatever information you're actually gathering could really change what you hear. So can you really trust your ear perfectly? Yeah, maybe not, right? So these are kind of another kind of factor of the information that we need to account of, saying like try to be flexible, right? And then your brain is actually really doing this, okay? So again, right, kind of coming back to the slide, right? But then we still need to make sure to know the important distinctions of the sounds of the language that you speak, right? You can be too flexible. You kind of have to still maintain kind of hearing some differences between, pear, bear, right, light, yell, well, and so on, okay? So how do you actually do that? Like, how do you actually solve all these kind of challenges that you are facing every single day? And then sometimes it's not just even like the, people, saying different things or like differently. It's also like the kind of background noise you might actually encounter. That also, makes a difference in terms of like what kind of sound signal that reach your ear. But your brain can do this so efficiently to parse this information very quickly. So it's basically kind of like you have kind of like an automatic skill. As soon as you hear the sound, you don't have to like, I don't know whether you ever like think about what was the sound like and then like try to figure out what the word that she said, right? You don't actually do that. As soon as you hear it, you recognize what the word is. So it's almost like you are really the experts in the sounds of your native language, and that expertise comes from your lifelong experience that you have. It's a very procedural skill. You don't have to explicitly, reason through or anything. But how do we actually start learning and gaining this kind of expertise? Okay, so I guess everybody have guessed that it really starts as soon as you're born, right? You are kind of out of this world. I mean, the babies, without their will or whatnot, but they're out. And then it's not like, do we think they understand you when you start speaking to them? No, right? I guess everybody agrees, or maybe not. But but we, like a caregiver still, like talk to the babies as soon as they're born, and right? We know they don't really understand, but you still talk to them. Like there's some kind of input, that they actually listen to. Of course, they really don't have much idea what the sound systems of, the native language sound, or whether this is speech, what it means. They just have no idea, right? But then they still get this input. So it's kind of like as if you're in a foreign speaking country. You can kind of think of that. Have you been like to a country where you don't speak that language? No, never. Some people did, right? So you're in the country and they're like, they don't speak English, then they speak, like the Korean speech that you heard. It's kind of like that. You don't hear anything, but, I mean, you hear, but then you don't understand, right? So babies are kind of in that kind of situation. They don't understand, but they still get the input, right? So when does this kind of learning start? I don't know if anyone actually wondered how this language learning starts when you're born as a baby. They don't really have much knowledge. How do they actually start learning? So just to kind of give you like a timeline, how this kind of sensitivity to their own speech, like the native speech sounds begins, it actually is done very quickly. Within the first year of life, they already kind of start distinguishing the sounds of their native language versus, compared to like non-native speech. So for instance, let's say, so this is kind of timeline within the first year of life, just kind of showing in month. The first 3 months or so, as they're born, they can actually distinguish any sounds of any language. Any kind of distinction, they would know, okay? But within like kind of 6 months and up to like within, like really about 10 months or 11 months, that's fairly quick, they already start showing some preferences for the speech sounds of the native language, and then basically decline to distinguish any of the non-native speech contrasts. So within the first year, their perceptual system gets already shaped up and then tuned to the native speech. So it's almost like you can think of it as like they're basically dedicating their brain almost to hear the native speech sounds, but then ignoring some distinction in the non-native speech sounds. Okay? Because a native speech sound is kind of important to them to understand, and then that's the kind of input. So they're almost like kind of having more preference for the native speech, but non-native speech sound that basically declines. So here's some example of kind of like how the speech sounds are different across different languages. This is not everything, but I just brought some quick example. So English, right, there is a L and R sounds, which is kind of shown, depicted by this color. Okay, so L and R, right, light, you guys can all distinguish that. That's fine. But let's go to Japanese. Japanese actually have a category called flat category, which is shown red dots here. That's basically kind of sit in between L and R. So it's kind of sound like la kind of sound. Have you ever heard this kind of ooh la? Some of you know, yeah. So that is a category, right, that basically is sitting on top of both L and R, okay? So what this actually suggests, is that, people who are born and raised in Japan, they're basically hearing this red flat category, but they don't actually hear L and R sounds, okay? So this is an important category for them, but there is no use for them to distinguish this as an L and R. Whereas if you're born in the US, then L and R is a very important sound that you need to make sure to distinguish, okay? So if we look at infants, so when they're born, after they're born, like 6 and 8 months old of age, so the red line is American infants, and then blue line is a Japanese infants. As they're born, and then like 6 and 8 months, both infants can distinguish English L and R sounds fine. They're okay, both of them, okay? But by the age 10 to 12 months, right, American infants, their ability to distinguish English L and R sound sharply increase, whereas Japanese infants, right, they were not getting this L and R sounds, but they only got that one flat category. That ability basically declines, okay? And this happens very, very quickly. And not just this behavior, but their brain. So we can also record some of their brain signal to see whether their brain can actually tell difference in these two sounds. American infants, when they hear L and R sounds, they are showing quite a large difference because they can already distinguish that. Their brain can actually tell the difference. Whereas non-native speech sounds, like for instance, like Japanese trying to hear L and R sound, it doesn't actually make meaningful difference in their native speech. So they actually basically, even their brain is treating those sounds the same, okay? So your experience within the first year is really shaping it up. Another thing is so what I'm trying to say is like first year of life, it seems to have a pretty big impact. That babies are learning their native speech sound very, very quickly within the first year. Then the question is, would that actually have a really big impact later in life? Okay? Or can that kind of new language you learn can actually override that? So this is actually a kind of a question that is still under debate. So I'm not going to give you like, this is really the ground truth, because there's still some research going on, and then some, there are some contradictory findings. But one or a couple research recently that's been done is looking at the international adoptees. So those are the adoptees who were like, born in one country, and they were exposed to their heritage language, let's say like first year or so. And then when they get adopted, and then to a different country, they're exposed to a completely different language, okay? So in that case, right, they were kind of first exposed to their heritage language within that really, beginning year of their life. Does that kind of remain any kind of trace or not, okay? So as I said, that this finding is still a little bit, still debatable. But this one finding is suggesting looking into the international adoptees who are, adopted in French-speaking families. And then these people actually do not speak Chinese at all, okay? Because after they got adopted, they don't know, okay? But then when we look at their brain activity when they're listening to Chinese speech sounds, their brain activation pattern seems to be very similar to that of people who are Chinese French bilinguals. But if you actually compare that brain activity to French monolinguals listening to Chinese, it's actually quite different. So this middle group is actually only, speaking French. They don't know Chinese. But somehow that first year of life, that exposure to that heritage language seems to have some kind of really long-lasting impact. And also there are some studies, like when they try to learn Chinese, like pick it up as an adult, they seem to have more advantage than like French monolingual, for instance. So there seems to be some kind of remaining thing that's happening, even though you only got very short exposure to your native language. But kind of going back to this point about, so all the different sound that you hear, how do you actually now hear something like, da versus ta, or ba versus pa, that kind of minimal pair words like deer versus tear? How do you actually tell the difference? So I'm going to play some sounds here, and I want you to kind of pay attention whether you hear bad or bat, and then whether you hear some other sounds. Okay, let's play that.
Bad. Bat. Bad. 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 Bad.
Okay. What did you hear? Bad and bat, going back and forth. Yeah.
I heard something kind of in the middle,
Yeah. Really?
in between bad and bat.
That's great, if you could, because a lot of us cannot. Okay. So what you actually heard is some sounds like this. Okay. And then this was actually, the order was mixed up. Okay. So sometimes the first sound was here, and second sound was drawn from here, third sound was here, and fourth, and so. Okay, so it's going back and forth. But what you actually heard, every single sound you heard in that audio was everything was different audio. Okay. But let's actually hear this sound now, which is basically in this order. Okay.
Bad. 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 Bad.
Do you now hear all 7 different sounds? Maybe or maybe not. So what we actually do here is that something that's coming from the same category, okay, so even though you heard these 2 sounds, you don't actually care. That's not really important distinction to you. So you don't really hear that difference. But if you hear 2 sounds from here, which is kind of in between the 2 categories, you suddenly hear, oh, that's completely two different sounds. Okay, so your perception is actually a really interesting thing. It kind of almost like provides a lens to you. So even though the acoustic, the sound is actually very different, your brain's interpretation is basically grouping the information into almost like groups, like into the bad category versus bat category. You don't actually hear every single distinction, really. Okay, so what factors is actually affecting that? Like, how do actually babies start going about learning these kind of distinction? Learning, like, what are the things that they can ignore and what are the distinction they actually have to really use? Okay, so it actually really starts from grouping the sounds, and they become very good at detecting the patterns of the sounds. So here's just some kind of examples of how like English ba sound versus pa sound are grouped. Okay, so they basically learn like some of the sounds coming from this category and this category. They basically kind of detect the patterns of the sound. And also same thing, right? English L and R sounds. So the sounds from the same, you know, like, oh, sorry, I realized I did not have the pointer. Like from the yellow category, they don't actually distinguish them. They're treating them as same. But as soon as you kind of cross the boundary from here to here, suddenly they can actually hear the distinction. Okay? So our brain system is actually highly efficient in gathering this information and organizing the information and then knowing which groups are the meaningful ones, even though they hear all the distinct sounds all the time. And then now going back to this one too, right? Like, so babies, once they start hearing the sounds, how do they actually even start detecting where the words are, what the words are? Like, as I said, like in the very beginning, right? Your brain is always hearing this kind of very continuous sounds. How do they start go about that? So let's hear the sound.
So when I turned 16 years old, Miss Macy offered me a job.
Oh, sorry about that. Oh, I think that's fine. All right, so you guys all understood that, okay? So as I said, like if I kind of put that into text, what that was like from the speech signal, this is kind of looking messy. It doesn't look like very unit like the sound. So this is what's happening, and how for you, it was kind of easy for you to understand each word. But for a baby, if they don't know these words, how do they actually figure out? How do they do that, right? So what's actually happening is that they're also really good at detecting what sounds follow and what sounds comes before. So not just sound itself, but also how these sounds are actually continuously staggering and then knowing this. So what we mean by this is that let's say they hear some sounds like this, pretty baby, this is a yellow bear. They hear this kind of sentence, right? In the acoustics, it's going to be all contiguous, right? But what's actually happening here is that pretty baby, right? There are different sounds are following each other, right, in this whole sentence. But if we actually look into what's actually happening is that pre-T, right, pretty, pre-T, that sound kind of follows one after the other pretty frequently. But T to bay sound, it can be pretty, bear, pretty, baby, pretty, chair, pretty, car, right? So that occurrence can be whatever, anything, right? So what they're actually being sensitive to is how frequently the sound one to the next is occurring versus, you know, like how like this sound to this sound, how frequently does that occur? So pre-T, that occurs pretty frequently, about like 70%, for instance, like about the speech input they're getting. But T to be, not so much, like 3%. So given this kind of frequency, how the sounds are actually occurring next to each other, babies can pick that up very quickly, and also it starts within the first year of life. That's actually pretty amazing skill. Yeah. And then they now know where the word boundaries are. Okay? Within the words, the sounds would actually transition or frequently occur, but between, like from one word to the other, the sound wouldn't actually occur that frequently. Okay, so they actually pick up that information. Another thing they really use also, not just the speech, of course there are all the other helpful information they can actually use, is that when they hear the sounds, they sometimes see a graphics or like a book or like a doll, right? So there's some kind of information that can actually try to see, oh, whatever the sounds that they're hearing must mean something, right? So this kind of visual information they get, they also can be very helpful for them. And I want to play some sounds also again, but I want you to hear and then see, kind of this could be also another kind of information that caregivers can give to the babies that could actually encourage their language learning. So let's hear this one sound.
This is a little plastic pond and little plastic yellow ducks with some corresponding shapes on the bottom. It's green, it's blue, green and blue, I should say.
Okay, so it's kind of, regular speech, some kind of, giving instruction. But let's hear this one.
Look at the water. Do you see the water? Let's put some ducks on. 1, 2, 3, 4 ducks.
Okay, I assume everybody have, done talking to a baby. Do you actually talk like that, or do you actually talk like the first person? Hey, this is a bear, like kind of like how I talk to you, or do you talk like, hello, how are you, right? You so pretty, right? Like you kind of go on like a lot of fluctuation. Do you actually find yourself doing that when you talk to the baby? I know it's kind of very interesting because sometimes like you don't think about it, but it just naturally like comes to you. And a lot of, it's like sometimes we call this like baby talk, right? Yeah. But that could be very helpful to the babies, okay? So this is kind of showing the intonation fluctuation, that first speech that you heard. I don't know, you can actually see it's a kind of dot, but then you can kind of see how it kind of continues. So that's kind of the dynamic range of the intonation that the first speech that you heard. And the second one that you heard, now is this one. Fluctuates so much, right? Like I speak like this, right? So this actually gives very big intonation cue, like dynamic wise, it's actually much more dynamic. But of course, the speech wise, it's, you speak slowly also. But infants can actually pick up on this cue really well, and it can be helpful. So why it's actually helpful? One is, of course, it is very dynamically changing. So, it can actually be work like an attention grabber, okay? They can actually pay attention to you more. But also, because of the intonation fluctuation, it can actually give them a cue. Oh, these are the words, like separate words, okay? But what I want to say is it really necessary for a baby to learn the language? Do you think baby talk is important, although it's helpful? Not necessarily, yeah. So there are some cultures, like in other languages, they really don't do any baby talk, which is kind of interesting. Sometimes for us, when we do it, like talk to a baby, it just naturally comes up. It's not like I was thinking about doing it, but some, languages do not have the baby talk, and they are fine in terms of learning their own language, right? So it's not always necessary, but it does help them to latch onto this cue and hear. And the other kind of things, which is kind of interesting, is that what kind of input they get or how they're getting their language input could also matter. So there are some study done. Patricia Kuhl is the researcher, very well-known researcher at UW, doing this study where the baby is the native, so American babies are hearing Mandarin Chinese, but there is a person interacting with the baby, and then just let baby hear Mandarin Chinese, versus the baby is actually hearing the Mandarin speech through screen, okay? So basically they're getting very similar input in terms of what language they hear, and the same amount of time to hear the Mandarin speech. But what we actually see here is that American infants, so this is a red bar here, that they are actually hearing Mandarin speech with a live person, they can actually distinguish Mandarin tone categories really well compared to the babies who are just exposed to through the video or the audio. Okay, so there seems to be some kind of benefit, have this kind of social interaction, which could be rewarding. And then also it's not like, you know, there's some kind of interaction going on, like I say something and then they're responding. So that kind of interaction could be reinforcing this kind of sound learning behavior. And some interesting thing recently also was found from the same group that suggests 2 are better than 1. So it's not like they need an adult to be present there to interact with them. So it doesn't have to be the adult interacting with the baby. What they found is that when baby is watching the video screen just by, you know, themselves versus being with the other infant who are all pre-verbal, those infants who are like being in the same room together, they seem to learn the speech sounds better for some reason, which is very interesting. And then the more partners that they actually encounter here seems to also have some kind of benefit. Okay, so which is kind of an interesting area. I mean, it's still some debate like why that might be it, but there is some kind of social component that comes with the speech development, which can be very helpful. So, I mean, so far what I've told you is like within the first year of life, they're learning quite a lot. Okay, even though they don't know what different concepts are, what the speech is, or what their native language sounds like, they can still learn really a lot. But now let's actually switch gears to think about adults. Okay, so adults, I mean, anyone speak different language or try to learn different language? Yes. Okay, so we kind of try to do that, and the Duolingo is a really popular app these days. You know, you can access language learning very easily, right? So we actually kind of, you know, try to do that, and a lot of you try to do that, and myself too. But I don't know, like when you're trying to learn language as an adult, I mean, were you able to do really well, or do you speak another language fluently? More or less?
It's like what you say, that everything strings together, and what's frustrating, especially for avoir un morceau s'il vous plaît. And it's like, wait a minute, slow down.
Right, right.
Separate the words.
Exactly. It just comes all at once, and then like, oof, that's a lot, right? But babies seem to do pretty well within a few years.
So maybe we need a teacher who talks to us in baby talk.
Oh, that's a great suggestion. Yeah, yeah. That's a great suggestion. That's one strategy. Right, right, right. But yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of kind of findings and try to see why is it so difficult for adults to learn a new language. I mean, adults, great learners. You guys can learn new things or new skills. I mean, if you try to learn a new board game, you can actually do that right away. Like, we are great, you know. we have like a lot of capacity to learn new things, but it's kind of seems a little bit much more difficult and challenging when it comes to language. And why would that be? So first of all, I think coming back to this figure, right? As I said, like those who are learning, you know, growing up hearing English LNR sounds, no problem. But for Japanese, when they start hearing this and become expert in this category, and then let's say native Japanese, like adults, try to move to the US and try to learn language like English, they have very, very hard time to distinguish LNR sounds. To them, it sounds all the same. So they just don't know what is a L sound versus R sound. I mean, it sounds very trivial to you guys because you can actually hear the distinction, but for them, it's very, very challenging. And that's actually a very challenging. So even after they've been living in, you know, in the English-speaking country like 5 to 10 years, they do not really master this. And why is that? Although babies can actually do that within the first year of life. So if we ask them to categorize a sound L and R, so each of these dots basically represent a sound token. So each sound in this space, like English listeners, native English speakers, would categorize this as all the L sound and all the R sounds, no problem. But given exactly the same set of sounds, we give them native Japanese to categorize, hey, L and R sounds. Can you tell me? I don't know whether you can clearly see that's very different. They're basically kind of carving out the space completely wrong, okay? So they're really trying. It's not like they're randomly pressing the button. They're really trying, but it's just so hard. It's because, as growing up, they just have one category, right? They don't actually try to make any of the distinction of that. And now moving to the US, now you have to kind of know where is that L and R sound. So it becomes very, very challenging. So just to give you some relatable example to you, because L and R sounds, you can distinguish them pretty well. So you're like, I don't understand what you're talking about, but I brought some example, because as a native Korean speaker, I can produce some sounds, and I'm gonna ask you to see whether you can hear the distinctions. Okay, so I'm actually first now point to each of the different sound categories. So here you have basically the same set of space. You have ba sound and pa sound. Okay, so ba, pa. Okay, whereas in Korean we have 3 different categories in the same space. So I'm going to point out first now here, ba, okay, pa, ba. Do you all hear 3 things?
Yeah.
You do? Good. Everybody hear 3 things? Okay, I'm not going to point now. I'm just going to say it. And you can actually tell me green, blue, or red, in what order I actually said. Okay? Pa,
Red,
ba,
green,
ba, blue, green. Okay, so I'm going to put it in the context of word. Blue,
blue,
okay, blue, pur.
red.
All right. So what I said was pur, pur, pur. Okay. So this one, it's kind of similar to pa sound, so you're okay. But this one, ba and pa, they're kind of similar. And then as a native English speaker, like, not so sure, right? So that's kind of an example. And I don't know if anyone is a Hindi speaker or any of the dialects of from India, but let's just play a quick sound here. Go to here, yes. So I actually found, so let's actually hear. So she's gonna say 2 like da sounds, and just pay attention to her and then see if you hear distinction. And she's gonna tell you what kind of da sound she's gonna say, all right?
The dental and retroflex sounds in Hindi. Let's start with dental sounds. The, th, the, the. Now retroflex. The, th, the.
Okay, so first set and the second set, do you hear distinction? Anyone? You do? You're excellent.
Really?
So, for Hindi speakers, hang on, how do I, Hindi speakers, no issue. They can totally distinguish that. But you, and also myself, because we don't have that sound category, I'm like, okay, I know she says this and that, but I don't know. I don't hear it, right? It's just like the tongue position is slightly different. So like the kind of near the teeth, the, and then the tongue goes a little bit towards the back, like palatal, the. So that's actually a very fine distinction, but we only have da sound. So we don't have to make that distinction at all, but Hindi speakers, that's a really important distinction because it means different things, right? So this is like any given language, when you try to learn a new language, you kind of have to start with the sounds. But if you can't hear the differences, like how do you even know, right? So it's a very, very difficult for adults to learn. Oops, where's my pointer? Okay. So in the laboratory, people were trying to see like how can we actually make people to learn language better. Like say, like if you should play the non-native speech sound in the background, would that be helpful? You know, sometimes we do that, like maybe we have to just get more exposure, right? So you kind of play like audiobook or like podcasts in the foreign language in the background while you're cleaning or doing dishes, as if it's going to really be helpful because you get more exposure. It should be helpful. But in the laboratory, when people did that, just have them hear a bunch of, you know, English LNR sounds and inviting Japanese to do that. Doing no task, just listen, does not really help. It wasn't really helpful. And then another kind of helpful thing that we could think about doing it is, why don't we give some kind of instruction? Just tell them, okay, that was an R sound and that's an L sound. So in this kind of context is when they hear one sound at a time, and then give them, hey, did you hear R or L? Tell me. And then if they make the correct choice, then you get the feedback. If they, you know, made a incorrect decision, then you give them incorrect. So you kind of just give them the feedback all the time. This is actually found to be helpful than just the, just exposing them without anything. So because this kind of gives them a little bit of instruction of what is the L and R sounds. But to be honest, if you think about, speech learning, I mean, this is really unnaturalistic way to learn language. It's not like you go to try to learn a new language. It's not like no one is really checking whether you're hearing the sound correctly or not. You're hearing it, right? No one's really giving you this kind of feedback. And then this one, the one thing is a lot of studies has been done using this kind of paradigm, giving them feedback about when they categorize correctly or not with native Japanese. But even after 2 to 4 weeks of training, they still have really hard time. I mean, they do learn, but it's still very difficult. So why would that be? Because that second case, giving them instruction, it's kind of giving them a feedback, but if you think about the speech, as I said in the beginning, it's almost kind of like a habit and automatic skill. But if you start getting kind of feedback and hearing one sound, as an adult and all the smart people, basically trying to analyze a sound and think about what about the sound that makes it into R versus L. They try to reason through. But speech doesn't really work like reasoning. As you can hear me, you just hear it and you can recognize the word right away. Rather than really reasoning, oh, her speech, this sound is really high pitch, and you don't actually do that, right? But that first kind of the feedback might actually put that, adults into that learning mode, okay? So I want to kind of give you a quick overview about what I did in my work is to use a video game with the adults, with the native Japanese. We are to see if we kind of, create some kind of interactive environment where they can use the sound, but, but then the sound is basically kind of helpful for them to navigate the game, whether it can be actually helpful. Okay? So in this video game, what's actually happening here is that each alien is appearing in the separate quadrant of the space, and each alien is producing one particular categories of the sounds, and they appear in a different quadrant. And also these are my enemy aliens, the blue and the gray ones. So whenever they appear in my spaceship, I need to shoot them. Okay. But these, the green and the orange one, these are my friends. So whenever they appear on the screen, I need to collect them. Okay, so I need to capture them. So the goal here for the learners is that we don't tell them, hey, listen to the sounds and then play the game. We don't actually instruct them at all. We just tell them, this is how you play the game, and just try to play the game as much as possible. So people don't even really pay attention to the sounds when they're playing the game, because they're actually really busy doing this kind of action, okay? This kind of space invader style. But then the interesting is, as they get better and better, the speed of game gets faster and faster. And that means aliens basically appearing much, kind of closer to my spaceship. So as you get better and the game gets faster, you're at the challenging stage. Now people really have to use the sounds to know which alien it is, and also kind of move the quadrant to see the alien and then take the correct action and continue playing the game. Okay, so I can actually show you briefly, and this is a very low level kind of playing, but I mean, I guess everybody have played Tetris before, maybe? Maybe you too? Yeah? Okay. So like in the beginning, like level 1, a lot of time you can actually take keyboard action, but then as you go really high level, blocks are dropping very quickly and you have to take very, very quick action. Okay, that is kind of speed of game that actually works. Although right now this one, the example I'm going to show you is kind of slow, but you can actually see how this game works. Very retro style, by the way. That's my friend, so I gotta capture that. Okay, so you get that. So you just kind of ask them to play the game, and then like maybe they might pay attention to them, maybe not, but you can actually just, you know, look at the aliens and do this. And what we did is we had native Japanese come into the lab for 5 days and play this game 5 days, just 30 minutes. And I didn't actually tell them like about sounds or anything, just come and play this game. So about, you know, a total, they got 2.5 hours of game training, and each alien had a particular English, you know, syllable sounds like da, ga versus ra, la sound. And what we see here is for da, ga, which actually exists in Japanese language too, so, you know, they don't really show much learning because they're already so good at it. But if we look at ra and la, how well they categorize before and after the training, there's quite a bit of learning gain, just about 2.5 hours of game training. And that is actually pretty comparable to the explicit feedback training they were getting like 2 to 4 weeks. So the thing about the game is that maybe it does have some more motivation, more interesting component, like people get really into it. But the other thing is that people are encouraged to use the game because it's really contingent to how well they play the game. So even though they are not really explicitly, you know, attending to the sound, their motor action becomes very, very habitual, like as if we are perceiving the sounds. And that is likely qualities that could tap into what we call the reward system in the brain. So the reward system, like if you do some behavior, you get a candy or you get a money, you want to do it more and more and more. That reinforces that behavior because you want to get more rewards. But if you get punishment, you don't want to continue that, that action because you're going to get the punishment. You know that, right? So this kind of like getting the reward or punishment could actually shape how you behave. And we actually think that video game is kind of having you to really recruit this reinforcement learning system. And then you do that over and over, it might become more like a habit with the speech sounds. So just to conclude, I think these are all the things I said, right? Like, so for instance, like video game, it could be helpful for you to develop the habit with the sounds, but also because you're so busy with the actions that you have to take, you don't actually really explicitly try to analyze what the sound was. You just have to take the action right away. So I think this could be why they can actually become a little better with distinguishing the English speech RNL sounds compared to just giving very traditional feedback. So I hope this talk was somewhat informative to give you so babies versus adults, we're kind of in the same situation. We don't know the speech and language that well. We're thrown out in the world to learn that, but somehow babies learn fairly quickly, whereas adults seem to have really hard time. And the reason that adults are having really hard time is you are such an expert in your own native language speech that now try to kind of come out of that and now try to learn a new sound system can be very difficult because you have such an expertise in your native speech, okay? But as you get, some kind of different type of exposure and different kind of experience with the speech sound, there is still room for learning, okay? And also there are a lot of studies that suggest that, people who are proficient in another language or bilinguals, there seems to be some cognitive benefit for instance, like kind of have more kind of like a good cognitive or like executive functions, like how we pay attention or switch to a different task. And also there are some studies that actually suggest that, you know, the bilinguals have a better cognitive reserve. So what I want to say is that do not give up and try to learn new things if you can, because it's not really about that, you know, your brain is not working anymore and then you're not, you know, be able to learn a new language, right? It's just kind of the type of experience could actually really matter a lot for adults to learn a new language. All right. Thank you very much for your attention, and I can take any questions.
Just what I'm going to do is grab the mic here so that people kind of on the live stream can hear. So we got a question here.
Let's take like music, for example. So if you had like 10 different people speaking 10 different languages, and let's say they're listening to like Beethoven or Bach, would they all hear the same sounds of the music, or is that different too?
Music is actually pretty similar because it doesn't have very fine-grained distinction that we have to make, and people can actually hear those tones differently. But I have to say, those who are actually coming from a different culture, so for instance, like Arabic, I believe, has a music scale is different. So we have Western scale, right, like the notes, like the piano. Right. But then in a different culture, their different notes are much more finer in terms of the tone. So we might not be able to hear it, but they can actually hear it well. But that's also coming from learning and being experienced with that, right? Yeah, yeah.
Another question over here.
You talked about learning how to recognize sounds. Does the ability to make the sound follow naturally, or is that a separate learning function?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. It actually comes almost simultaneously, kind of back to back. So I did not really point that out, but in this timeline, let me, how do I go back to this one? Oh yes, here. Oh, yeah, here. So here, I was just focusing on the speech, but then at the bottom here, like around this age, they start babbling also, and then around the 12 month of age, they start producing like some word like mama, dad, dada, and things like that. So it does actually come, but definitely it follows a little bit later, I would say, because they don't really have a good motor control as they're born. So they can actually first start distinguishing the sound, but they don't really produce too much instead of, you know, like, or other than like crying and things like that. But around within the, you know, first year of life, they start producing something like da, da, da. And
sounds of their native language.
Yeah, yeah. But it's not really fine as, you know, hearing at that point, yeah.
So there really is something to, like if you're bringing up your child and you want them to be bi or trilingual, get them doing it earlier in their...
Yeah, yeah, I think that is helpful, although there are some, you know, different opinion about that, is before you really know well of your native sounds, now coming with it all different sounds, like it's, you know, they get also could be a little bit confused. What is a native sound, or like different, so they don't actually hear it. This is a French sound, this is English sound. They don't actually categorize that way. It's all the sounds that they're getting, right? So some people actually say it could actually, you know, cause more like to speak late, but still, like kind of getting early exposure definitely would help them to become experts in these.
Yes,
right?
my brother was born here in the U.S., ended up moving to Switzerland, you know, ultimately was speaking German there, and the woman he married is Polish, and so with their two children, she speaks only Polish to the kids, he speaks only English to the kids, and when they're in school, they learn German.
Right.
So now they are trilingual, and
yeah.
You know, but that was just the way that they brought them up, and they seem to. My nephew was here a couple weeks ago, and his English is extraordinary. So, yeah, so I'm very jealous because I I took 3 years of French. I failed the year in my third year, but I passed the Regents, so I got my Regents diploma. But I did not get the language gene, or so it seems.
Yeah.
Any other questions here? Oh, hold, we have another one back here.
I'm just wondering what led you to your interest in language.
Oh, that's yeah. It was a big journey. I was talking to Drew just now, saying that I initially thought I was gonna become a musician because all the members of my family are professional musicians, except me. So I'm a black sheep. Sorry. But then that kind of led me to, I mean, there are kind of complicated reasons why I decided not to pursue music anymore, because I kind of found some other interests and I wanted to explore different career options. But one thing that really led me to be interested in was just general about the sounds. Why do we actually hear the sounds, and how do we actually hear the sound? Like, what is actually affecting us to, like, listen? And like the music was kind of one of the reason, like, why you hear this music, why this kind of feeling gets elicited, and how do we parse? It could be very different. I mean, we're hearing everything the same, but the interpretation is slightly different, right? And then that kind of led me to be interested in the speech side, because you hear the sounds and you can actually parse the information very quickly and very well, but then when it comes to like hearing different, language sounds, you don't even know what you're hearing or like the words are. So that really led me interested in like kind of what is the kind of the constraint that we have, for instance, of our system. Like, what is our brain doing even? So we get all the signal, but what is the brain's interpretation? So that really led me to kind of following this path. But yeah.
All right, another question.
Yes, you talked about different ways to teach adults to differentiate different types of sounds, like different ways to quiz them or have them play games. But what about just coaching them on how to make the different sounds? Because between the two flap sounds, your tongue's in a different place, your lips are in a different place, and if you taught those mechanics, would it then help them recognize the sounds?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, whether that's really helpful or not. So I think there is definitely some research that suggests, like, once you start hearing them, and then also you can produce better, and then if you produce, you can hear better, but not always necessary, that it doesn't always follow a hand in hand. So even though you produce it, but then when someone else producing and you hear it, right, you sometimes cannot map to your own motor, like articulatory motor system. So like I have basically, it's an anecdote, but I have a good friend who's also a language researcher from Japan, and she's been living in the US like over 20 years. She can produce LNR sounds. I didn't really think she has any trouble with hearing them, but then she actually told me, actually, I still struggle. I can't hear them sometimes. I mean, someone's, like, so she's better than those who just came, from Japan, but still there are some parts like she got really confused. So we also had a colleague in the lab, her name was Ran Lu. So my Japanese colleague was like, actually, I'm still confused. Is her name Lan Ru or Ran Lu? Like, I know R and L exists, but yeah. Like, so it seems, even though she produced fine, and then the reason is, when you produce, you really are conscious, and then you hear, like, say, la or light, or like you try to produce very clearly. But when you're hearing with all the mixture of the sound, as I said, right, when it comes very fast, you have to recognize very quickly, but that doesn't really, so you don't really get that really clear sound, I guess. So that's probably why sometimes it becomes very difficult. Yeah, but that's a really great point. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. Oh, well, yeah, here we go.
Really all great questions, yeah.
So basically two different things. One is, what I kept hearing you saying is that when the infant learns to distinguish, the brain learns to suppress certain things. They don't exist. So the LNR don't exist.
You mean when they're first born?
No, not when they're first born. By the time they're a year and they've learned all
Oh,
this.
Japanese infants. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The L and R don't exist.
LNR doesn't exist, but there's another category
There's
that's on
something-
top of that, right?
There's something on top of that so that they're not going to hear the L and the R because it's masked.
Yeah. But infants, though, it's not completely solidified, I would say. I have to mention that. Although within the first year, their brains start already tuning to the sound system of their native language. But it's still, in a way, I would say, like malleable, because it takes quite a long time to like completely master that. So once they get another exposure, there's a way to get adjusted. But basically, if they were only exposed to native Japanese, they kind of don't really try to even make the distinction of LNR, as you said. Yes.
So your experience, second question, your experience. Korean first?
Mm-hmm.
And when did you learn English?
So it's interesting because I lived in the U.S. about a year when I age 6. So I lived in Wisconsin-Madison briefly because of my parents came here. And then we went back to Korea. And then I did not really continue my English lessons until middle school. So I really felt I lost everything, in terms of English. I mean, I knew words and stuff like that, but write it in sentence and all that, I thought it was completely gone. So in middle school was actually again when I really start actual instruction in classroom to learn English.
So all the language examples that you gave, people slur. It's very common in English for an English speaker not to use T, but to use a D sound.
Oh, like water?
Water.
Yeah.
Wooder. In Philadelphia, it's not water. It's not water. It's not water. It's wooder.
Water, okay. I learned that now, today, yes. All these dialects are very difficult as a non-native speaker, I would have to say, yeah.
And then the other thing is some of the examples you gave, like bear and pear, pear the fruit, pear the two. English has all these homonyms.
Yes, yes, yes.
Which I would think makes it harder.
That definitely makes it harder. Although I have to say, it's not just based on the sound. Sometimes you hear what was a conversation about, and then so based on the word meaning, you can also try to use that information to see whether it was actually a fruit pear versus whether a pear. So there are definitely those cases, but I have to say English is especially hard because what is written on the spelling versus what it's said, it's the same A. Why is it sometimes a versus versus yeah. As a learner of English, it's very, very difficult. I have to complain.
So in high school, I learned that I could pick up a piece of German literature and I could read it. I don't know what it says, but
read.
I know how it's pronounced.
Yes. Yes.
But I look at English, you have to know.
You have to know. No, that I agree. Yeah. So English, I would say it is somewhat difficult language to learn also, as well as to read correctly. And one thing I have to say is German is really, whatever it's written, you can completely pronounce it. It's just so easy because there's a direct mapping of how it's written to the sound, whereas English, how it's written, it can be pronounced differently, right? So kite as k with K, school with k, but CH, right? So I have to complain about that. Yeah, definitely, yeah. SCH, yeah.
Same SCH in English would be should rather than the hard CH. So.
I know. I schedule. Yes, exactly.
Then you throw in regional accents. Yeah, I when I was first working in Boston,
yeah.
I flew into the airport, and then I took the shuttle bus to pick up my rental car, and there were two of the rental car people that were talking on, I swear I could only understand about a third about what they said because they were in Boston. But then you go down south or you go out to the Midwest and you get that long flat O. And so, yeah, that's a whole nother.
That's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say, so I came here during my high school. So I was living in Richmond, Virginia, got exposed to a bit of a southern accent, a little bit. Like, that sounds a little different, but I can't really like produce it that well, but I could tell there's some difference there. And then I went to college in Pittsburgh, and I don't know whether you guys know, called Pittsburghese. They have their own interesting accent or dialects. So that football team Steelers are called Stillers. And I'm like, that doesn't sound right, but that's how they do it, right? So they have their own accent, which is like very subtle though to me. And I know a lot of students coming from Long Island, and I heard there's like Long Island, their own accent. And then that one is a little hard for me, but I sometimes hear it when they say like orange. Orange is something that I like notice. I'm like, oh, okay, from Long Island. There are certain like sounds that I can actually pick it up. And also I was living in Boston for several years, and then what they say is like Park Street. I'm like, where's the R go? And then they put R somewhere else, and I got so confused, right?
Park the car in Harvard Yard. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, Harvard, right? I don't know if I'm even saying it correctly, but yeah. So dialects can be very difficult, but especially like as a second language learner, because we can actually try to learn, but it's already kind of hard to learn the standard sound system. But with the dialects, that shifts way more, then it actually gives way more challenge on you too. So, yeah, I mean, it's a hard thing. But what I'm trying to say is we can do it, right? Yeah.
All right, Dr. Lim, thank you so much again for this really great, interesting talk.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Really appreciate it. So next week, our talk is going to be about the ring worlds that are out there beyond Saturn. So you can go to our website and see what's up next. Now we have a rule here that when you come up to Kopernik, if you've here, especially for the first time, you can't leave until you look through a telescope. Tonight, however, we're going to have to dispense with that. But if you paid to get in, you can go back to the register and you'll get a card to come back for free on another night. So feel free to avail yourself of that. Also, if this is your first time here, be happy to at least give you a tour of the scopes, and we can show you some of the images of the things that we do here. So anyway, thank you for coming. And on your way, especially for your first timers, on your way back, watch for the deer. All right. Thanks again.